Hello Internet, this is Terrence and you are watching a Maker Dad. My kids and I have been on a trip for the past week. We are currently in the Chicago area, and yes, this is a hotel bathroom. My kids are still asleep. It turns out that's the Great American Solar Eclipse fell on my kids' spring break, and my wife's co-workers' parents own a farm outside of Missouri, and they were gracious enough to host us, my family, and about 300 other people on their farm to watch the solar eclipse. So big thanks and shout out to Emily, Eric, and Emily's parents for making that happen. That was a total blast. My kids had a great time. And I was able to bring along this little contraption to try to video and film the solar eclipse. Now to start, the image that I was hoping to get was to hold this camera in one place and watch the sun travel through the field of view with the moon starting to block out portions of the sun. I wasn't able to get that, and the big reason for this is while this box looks pretty bulky, it's actually really lightweight. And so I had this wedged in between a picnic table and a chair, but A, people kept bumping it, and B, the wind kept moving the camera as well. So I ended up having to adjust the camera's framing quite a few times during the solar eclipse. I plan on doing some more image processing on it when my programming skills are a little bit better, to see if I could get some sort of stabilized image with the pictures that I've taken. But beyond that, there were some other technical challenges as well. So the first thing that you'll notice is that there's a little bit of a foil dome here that I added. And this was added ad hoc in the field. Basically, I had this camera all set up, ready to go, getting a good image, and the phone promptly shut it down due to excess heat. The phone was in direct sunlight, which it had to be in order to image the sun, and it wasn't having a good time at all. Fortunately, I ended up having a little bit of extra aluminum foil from when I was building this whole camera setup in my pocket. So I was able to rig a little aluminum foil tent, and I was able also to dump out most of my water that I had put into my water bottle that morning. I have some ice left from the hotel, and I was able to build an ice pack to tuck in underneath the foil blanket, between my phone and the foil blanket. And between that ice pack and the foil reflecting most of the solar energy, I was able to keep the phone cool enough to image the eclipse, which is actually about 2-ish hours in length. Secondly, and we've talked about this, I was hoping to just set this camera up, wedge it in place on a picnic table and just forget about it. But there were lots of things that were bumping the camera. Wind was actually a fairly big concern. This thing, while it looks pretty bulky, is pretty much just an empty cardboard box, right? So anytime the wind picked up, the camera was doing this or worse. So I ended up having to reframe my shot quite a few times during the solar eclipse. Before I share images and videos from the eclipse, I also want to talk a little bit about the camera setup. So your traditional cell phone camera is not going to work for filming this, and that's because the amount of light that actually reaches the back makes it almost impossible to operate the phone in a normal way. I actually ended up downloading a program that allows me to full manual control over the focus and the exposure of the camera, and that is a big help. By the way, traditional photography, if you're coming from a DSLR world, you have 3 levers you can pull for ambient light photography. You can control your ISO, you can control your aperture, and you can control your shutter speed. These 3 settings control the amount of light that is used to form an image. On a cell phone, your aperture is fixed. In my case, it's a fixed open at 1.8 aperture. So really, your only 2 levers you can pull is your ISO and your shutter speed. And so when you're exposed when you're exposing these controls, the ISO number may look really weird to you because you're used to seeing ISOs in a geometric progression, right? 100, 200, 400, 800 ISOs and so on. But on a cell phone camera, this value can really, really vary. Now I'm going to show you a couple of images, and these images were taken at an ISO of 11,377, which is the maximum ISO that this camera supports, and an exposure time of 8 seconds. So you can imagine not a lot of light is coming through to paint this image, right? And if you were to look at the front of the camera, you can see that my cell phone blocks off the big opening for imaging, and the only light that's coming through into this box is through this small pinhole here in the front to form an image that is a little bit bigger than 8.5 by 11. That's actually bigger than that on the inside of the box. So the first thing that your normal cell phone camera is going to have trouble with is setting the focus. And so to set the focus, I have the phone in manual focus mode. This is unlocked through this app that I've downloaded. The app is called ProShot for Android. I set the phone on the ground, and I put the camera into manual focus mode, and I use the patch of grass here next to the phone that is lit by direct sunlight. This allows me to fine-tune and set the manual focus and lock it in place. Now knowing that this focus is not going to drift, I can then install this phone back into the camera holder, like so. Now, again, the pinhole camera pictures that I've shown you are taken at an ISO of 11,377 with an 8-second exposure time. This is what it takes to take in a normal daylight sunlit scene to form an image on this camera. However, we are imaging the sun directly in the case of taking pictures of the eclipse, and there you actually want to lower your exposure a little bit. You see, if you use a regular phone's auto exposure setting, the algorithm tries to expose the average value of the pixels to about an 18% gray. This will basically blow out any of the details that you may hope to see in the sun. And so for these exposures that you're about to see for the solar eclipse, I actually manually control the aperture, I manually control the exposure by setting the ISO to about 100 to 200 and about 250th of a second to 160th of a second to 1/24th of a second exposure time. Somewhere in this region is actually the proper exposure for exposing the sun that's been imaged through a pinhole onto a sheet of copy paper. So anyway, that's about all I have. So I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I've taken. In the future, I'm hoping that I can write some sort of image processing algorithm to essentially lock the image of the sun in one spot and then be able to play it back as a time lapse. But in the meantime, this is the footage that I have. So enjoy.